Welcome to the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production. For transcriptions, show notes, and extras, please visit us at theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. Now, broadcasting across the world from the heart of the American Bible Belt, here is your host, Michael B. Rush.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Black Swan Rising podcast. I am your host, Michael B. Rush. Today, I want to talk about something that is referred to in the book of Enoch as the worthless mysteries. So what are the worthless mysteries? Well, in the book of Enoch, these 200 men from another world come down to the earth and they become utterly corrupted, and they corrupt the children of Adam and Eve, and the entire world becomes so corrupt that, God has to destroy it. But one of the reasons for the corruption is the Watchers introduce all this advanced technology, but it goes beyond that. The book of Enoch says that they practice alchemy and witchcraft. And, this is something that's bad news all around. But when Enoch talks about it, he refers to it as the worthless mysteries. Now, when you look back on the ancient world, there are clearly some things that are quite peculiar. In the Middle Ages, and really throughout antiquity, there were these kind of occult groups that were fascinated with alchemy, and alchemy goes way beyond chemistry. Right? Alchemy was basically transforming one thing into another thing, but it often involved things that, we would refer to as, satanic rituals, terrible things. And if you look at some of these alchemy documents from the Middle Ages, it's bad stuff. And it makes me think back to the priests of Pharaoh in Egypt. They were doing some crazy witchcraft stuff, right? Moses comes in there. He has the power of God. God tells him to cast down his staff before Pharaoh, and it turns into a serpent. And that's crazy. But then the priests of Pharaoh do the same thing. And how in the heck did the priests of Pharaoh do this? Well, the knowledge, I believe, that the Watchers imparted to the ancient world was safeguarded by some of these groups, and it was passed down. And I think that they were using this kind of stuff, which is horrific. It involves human sacrifice and just incredibly dark stuff that I don't really want to get into. But by doing that, it seems clear that there was some actual stuff happening there that is beyond our ability to explain. But those things, again, I want to go back to this, Enoch referred to as being the worthless mysteries. So I want to talk about this a little bit more, because one of the things that we know about the last days is that we're going to have this antichrist figure, and we're going to have this beast, that both of them are going to be empowered in ways that we simply do not understand. And I believe that they are going to have what Enoch would refer to as access to these worthless mysteries. And this is why they're going to be able to do all of these things that are seemingly incredible, and they will be incredible. Just like when you go to a magic show and you see the magician up there and he does some crazy stuff up on the stage. Like I went to a magic show in Maui, my wife and I did. And we saw this guy take somebody's ring from the audience, and then he did something to it, and then he got this can and he opened it up with a can opener, and inside of the can was an egg, and then he cracked the egg open, and inside of the egg was a walnut, and then he cracked the walnut open, and there was the ring. I have no idea how they did that. Clearly they've got some trick going on behind the scenes. And to the people that actually know the trick and the sleight of hand and all that kind of stuff, it if you were to know all of that, it kind of takes the air out of the balloon. But when you can't see that, it is incredibly impressive. And so what I think is probably going to be going on here is we know that demons have power. I don't like talking about it, but they clearly do. I've read a couple of books from, I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he's like, one of the most prominent exorcists in the Catholic Church. And he's talked about some of the things that he has seen, and there is simply no explanation for it. Like people throwing up broken glass and rusty nails and balls of barbed wire, things that should be impossible, but and these people are saying they never had them, they never ingested anything like that. So there's some crazy stuff going on there, but I believe that when you're talking about these worthless mysteries, like Enoch referred to, if you could pull back the curtain, of what's really happening here, I think that you would probably see just a bunch of demons doing things that, they're compelling things to take place using, natural laws, but compelling, things to happen, perhaps even at a quantum level that is unfathomable for us to consider, but that they can force to happen. But if you were to see all of that and you were to understand what it is that they were doing, it would be obvious that we were being deceived by false miracles. For instance, when Christ does something like this, when Christ changes water to wine, there's obviously no demonic forces involved whatsoever. I believe that the elements at a quantum level are jumping to obey his command. I believe that when demons are working these miracles, they are compelling these quantum forces to do things, much like when we generate electricity, we are compelling electrons down lines and into AC/DC motors, and we're compelling that motion to happen and that work to be performed. And, it's remarkable to see it happen, but it's not happening voluntarily. It's happening because, we are forcing combustion explosions within an engine that then harnesses the power of the explosion into constructive ways and things like that. Whereas, God can simply just ask these things to happen and they comply because he's God, and all things obey God, with the caveat of human beings. We openly disobey God. But I think that this is what is happening in the background. And this is why, if you're ever confronted with something like this, I think this is where the name of Jesus Christ becomes so powerful. And being able to, the demonic forces, they are no different from, the elements themselves, in that they must obey God. Now, if you look at, and I'm not advocating that you do this, but if you look into, make a study of, some of the demonic encounters in the Bible, one of the things that you will see is that these demonic entities, they're essentially acting like lawyers. It's as if they are tiptoeing around some sort of cosmic law that God has put in place, and they are permitted to do some of these things within this cosmic law. And but it's absolutely clear that whenever Jesus Christ commanded them to leave, they left. They could not disobey him. Now, this was not always true for his disciples. Even we're talking the 12 apostles. There's a difference between the 12 apostles and your run-of-the-mill disciple, right? These were people that they literally learned everything that they knew at the feet of Jesus Christ. And yet we have examples in the New Testament. I'm thinking of one example in particular where you have this man and his son, and the son is possessed, and he's constantly causing himself harm. He's throwing himself into the fire. He's, causing his parents extreme anxiety. There is no peace in this household. And so when this man heard that, the apostles were in his town and that they were preaching Jesus Christ's name, he took his son to them and asked them to cast out the evil spirits from his son. And they attempted to, but they could not. And they, got into, an argument, a heated exchange regarding what was going on here and why they couldn't do this. And then here comes Christ, and the man comes up to Christ and says, Master, if you can do anything to help us, please do it. And Christ's response to the man was, all things are possible to him that believeth. And the man immediately said, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. Meaning, clearly, this man, he was shaken by the fact that these apostles couldn't do anything. But here is the Lord and Savior that they were preaching. And, he clearly had some doubts, and Christ understood that. And, thus Christ's epic response to him, and frankly, the Father's epic response back to Christ, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And then, the Lord, in an instant, casts out the evil spirits, and the boy is immediately made whole. So the apostles later are talking with Christ and say, "What's going on? We look like a bunch of stooges. We're trying to cast out this, demon in your name, and it's just mocking us. It's not listening. It wasn't obeying. Why could you do it, and why couldn't we do it?" And, Christ told, "Hey, some of these guys are more obstinate and don't come out without, much prayer and fasting." But Christ didn't need to pray or fast. He just needed to say the word. So clearly, I think that, there are some degrees of faith here. And, ultimately, the apostles, they were very young in their faith at that point. I mean, they were, total gospel noobs, right? I mean, they didn't even understand that Jesus Christ had come to sacrifice himself for the sins of the world. So they were very young in their faith. But frankly, friends, so are many of us. And in Christ's name, there is great power. Christ can do anything. And he has told us that, in the last days, that his disciples will be able to perform greater miracles than he ever performed. So who's he talking about? Well, he's talking about the righteous people that are living in the last days, the people of understanding. In the book of Daniel 11, it talks about how the people of understanding will do great exploits. By that, you should understand they are working miracles. And they're doing those miracles to preserve the saints, right? So God is going to empower his children to be able to serve and help one another. And you can bet your bottom dollar that as these supernatural dark forces, these worthless mysteries, become more pervasive, that God is also going to endow his disciples with greater power. And so we need to be preparing ourselves for that. And we need to understand, some of these things and how they're working and how some of, this Antichrist, he's going to be able to do some of these things because he is going to be, if you read in Daniel where it talks about this Antichrist, it says that he will become strong, but not with his own power. He's going to be empowered through Lucifer, through Satan. And, all of the hosts of heaven that followed Satan, which are legion. And if you read Revelation chapter 12, Satan and all of his legion of fallen angels, they are imprisoned here upon this earth. And we're vastly outnumbered by Satan and his minions here. And so it should come as no surprise that, these folks are going to be able to do some incredible things. And there are those, I'm speaking of our brothers and sisters that are going to give themselves over in the pursuit of these worthless mysteries. And, they are going to they're going to do terrible things. And, as a result, they are going to be empowered to do some awful things. But the price that they are paying is terrible. And, essentially, if you could pull back the curtain, you would just see these demons, kind of like the magician's stage hands, making the trick happen. But because we can't see the demons with our eyes, it all looks fantastical. But if you really understood what was going on, and that it took all of these, demonic entities to make these things happen, it would, take all the air out of the balloon, and it would be far less impressive. But we can't see those things, so it will be impressive, and there will be many of us that are going to be completely deceived by this kind of stuff. But we need to, hold fast and, know the reason for our hope and who it is that we worship. And this is a really, really important point, because throughout the Bible, you have many different religions who thought that they were worshiping the one true God, right? I mean, the Canaanites, they were worshiping the son of El. El is the name of God. And the son of El was the Lord, which, was simply Baal. And, when you had Elijah go and you'll call them to repent, they were angry because they thought they were worshiping the true and living God and his son. But they were not. They had, they did not know the being whom they were worshiping. They were worshiping a demonic counterfeit of the one true God. And I am sure that there were reasons that, they had faith in these things of these idols of stone and wood and ceramic and whatever. Because I'm sure that some of these priests, and I mean, they were doing human sacrifices and sacrificing their children. And, I'm sure that some of these guys were being endowed with, that, let me say that differently. I am sure that demons were facilitating miracles that caused people to believe in the priests of Baal and the priestesses of Asherah and so on and so forth. These things can happen, but you look at what happened when Elijah challenged the priests of Baal to make a sacrifice and to call down fire from heaven to devour the sacrifice. They weren't able to do that. And I am sure that God prohibited the demons from acting, because one of the things that we do know is that this antichrist and this beast will call down fire from the heaven in the last days in the eyes of all people. And that will be one of the shocking things. But clearly God did not permit them to do that at that time. And then, of course, he did so for Elijah's sacrifice and consumed it in the eyes of all the people. And so everyone knew that God was who he said he was. I think that we're going to see a lot of this. And I think that you're going to have a lot of people literally selling their souls for this kind of, access to demonic power. And they're being duped. It's like selling your soul to learn one of the magician's magic tricks. And then you realize, how it was all fake and a deception. We just can't see all of the deception and how it is all working right now. But we know that, there were some things that the priests of Pharaoh simply could not replicate, but, that God could easily do. And, I think that as you go further down the supernatural rabbit hole and you start, looking into things like skinwalkers and some of these, scary kinds of things. You talk to some Native Americans. I mean, the rituals that they talk about that people engage in order to harness that kind of power, they're clearly demonic. And, we want absolutely nothing to do with any of these worthless mysteries. The only power that we are interested in is the power of the Son of God. And anything else, it's a counterfeit. Regardless of how incredible it looks on the surface, it's a worthless mystery. And we should not waste our time with it. We may not understand how it works, but we know that it is coming to pass through demonic influence that we simply can't see. But if we could see it, it would not be very impressive, because you would literally see the demons running around and doing whatever it is that they're doing to make the trick happen. But we don't have eyes to see that right now, but we can understand it, and we can steel ourselves for that in advance, because that is most definitely coming down the road. And there are going to be a great many people that are going to go after these worthless mysteries, and they will be endowed with this kind of demonic power to do things that are going to make us look foolish, and they will use it to hurt us and to persecute us, and they are going to feel like, they, have godlike power, and it will seem to everyone else that they do have godlike power. But there is a very great difference between the power that they are using and the power of God, because they can't stand before God. And, how powerful can they really be, therefore? So, that's, this is, just been, weighing on my mind. I feel that I, needed to talk about it. And, so this is it. I don't encourage anyone to, really go down this rabbit hole. But I think that this kind of stuff is going on in much greater numbers and has a much further reach than we realize or we would feel comfortable discussing. But it's there. It's growing. and it is about to have the shackles taken off of it, and it will be in your face. And so the fact that that is coming, don't let that shake your faith in Jesus Christ. Any more than you go to a magic show and that shakes your faith. There's clearly a trick to what's happening. Yeah, it looks cool. It's impressive. But at the end of the day, you know that there's something going on behind the scenes. It's not like the power that Jesus Christ has. When Jesus Christ can say to a mountain, remove, and it removes, or to the sea, divide, and it divides, or literally to the elements, form a planet, and it does. I mean, that is true power. That is when the elements willingly obey, not when they are somehow being compelled to obey, much like we compel a combustion engine to drive a car forward, or an electric motor. It's not the same. It's not the same at all. One requires fuel to be in the tank, or electricity, and the other simply requires the command of God, and it's done. So let's focus on the things that matter most, the things that are real. If you would like to be endowed with the power of God, like Elijah and Elisha were, well, then you ought to seek power from the ultimate source of power, the kind of power that can banish Satan, the kind of power that can form worlds, the kind of power that can raise the dead, the kind of power that can cause the blind to see, and the deaf to hear, and the lame to walk, and, frankly, to raise up seed to Abraham from stones. I mean, that is power. And this charade, this demonic charade that is going to soon be parading before our eyes, will be enabled by technology and by demonic influences, and are what Enoch referred to as the worthless mysteries. And remember, Enoch said that the watchers are going to return. Therefore, their worthless mysteries are going to return. And indeed, I think they are already here, because there are people engaging in witchcraft, and they're engaging in witchcraft for reasons, and the reasons that we want nothing to do with whatsoever. It's worthless stuff. It's all, lies and deception. It may look cool, but man, that is a heavy, heavy price to pay for looking cool, right? So that's the difference between this demonic power, is that it seems powerful, and God's power is that it is powerful. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, Satan does have power, and it is real, and it is incredible compared to, our norms, right? But it's nothing compared to the power of God. And, Satan, he is not operating with a veil. He understands quantum mechanics unlike us. And he understands that, at the base of everything, at the quantum level, human consciousness does literally interact with quantum particles. I mean, we've seen this in the dual slit experiment, where they've taken slits in some material and bombarded it with protons, and when they are observing those photons, they change their characteristics. They, based on focused human consciousness on them in the act of measuring them, they change behavior between acting like waves and acting like particles. And that is inexplicable to me, but it has been demonstrated numerous times. Look it up, the dual split experiment. So if we can interact with quantum particles in that way, surely Satan is able to interact with them at another level. But God is able to interact with them in a way that literally makes nothing impossible to him. He can literally do anything. So, in fact, I'm convinced that God can travel forward and backward through time, and time doesn't exist for God. There's an angel that in the book of Revelation that comes down at the end and says, time is no longer. That may be more interesting of a statement than we presently comprehend. But think about some of these people in the Bible that have had dreams and visions, and they've seen things, future events. How on earth could they see those things? God has access to the future, just as he has access to the past. There is literally nothing that's impossible to him. And as we learn to trust him and to exercise our faith in greater and greater ways, we will be able to tap into the power of God, for it is promised that we will be able to do that. But I think that all things happen according to God's timing. And, God he's not looking for a bunch of magicians, right? He's not going to empower us in these incredible ways so that we can look cool to our friends. He's going to empower us in these incredible ways so that we can survive the demonic onslaught that is most certainly about to be poured out upon us. There's reasons for God's timing. But if you ask, ye shall receive, if it is God's will that you do so. So these are the things that have been on my mind since the last podcast. I hope that this has given you something to think about. The power of God is incredible, and he says that Christ, his son, told us that if we have the faith of a mustard seed, that we will be able to do incredible things. So let's be working on that, friends. Let's get ready, because something wicked this way comes, and we need to be able to counter that with righteous power that we can exercise through the Son of God and in his name. And so let's make this a topic of meditation, contemplation, study, and prayer, because we are going to need people that can not only say, but can do. And we're going to need them very badly. So let's rise to that calling. Let's strive to be those people of understanding that can do the great exploits on behalf of their fellow man. All right, that wraps it up for this episode. Until next time, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find. God bless.
You have just finished an episode of the Black Swan Rising podcast, an L10 production, hosted by Michael B. Rush. For show notes, transcriptions, and extras, please visit www.theblackswanrisingpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, click the share button icon and send it to your friends and family. This will help to ensure the continued publication of future content. Michael thanks you in advance for sharing and looks forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep seeking, for they that seek shall find.